Hello, welcome to the Joel Fleischman Happy Hour Podcast, episode number 63. I have with me Zach and Galante.
That's right.
That's good.
Cheers.
Seminarian.
Yeah.
Soon to go to Rome. Is currently living and working and presiding and preaching and all that great stuff in Holy Trinity Kewaskum, where I am a member.
Right.
Do you have a little more
Sure,
bio?
I'm from West Bend, so nice and close to home here in Campbellsport. I do study in Rome at the Pontifical North American College, the Gregorian University, founded by, named after St. Gregory the Great, but a lot of other saints have been connected to it. I'm in my 6th year of formation to be a priest, so I'll be a priest in 2 years, God willing.
Congratulations.
Thank
yes,
you.
God
We're
willing.
getting there. And yeah, just grateful to be here today. So thanks for the invitation, Joel.
So why did I bring Zach on? My dad calls him wannabe because it's wannabe. He wants to be a priest. So my dad just says, "Hey, what's up, wannabe?" Is that fair?
Yeah, he says wannabe, or now he says gonna be.
Oh, gonna be. Yep, gonna be is kind of his roving nickname. So gonna be is with me today. And why is he on? What's the importance of this? Last Sunday, Father Strand was having a homily. I believe it was just last Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just last Sunday he was having a homily, and it was regarding, he had mentioned something about heaven. He said, when we get to heaven, we will sit, loosely his words, we will sit at the throne of God and for eternity sit at his feet and worship him with all the love in the world. Is that close to what he said?
Yeah, something like
Paraphrasing. I was like, oh my goodness, I really hope it's not like that. How incredibly boring.
And he said one thing that really got you going was there are no sports in heaven.
He did. He was like, there's not going to be golf in heaven because I get frustrated by golf, and I guess if you want golf in heaven, there could be golf, something along that line. Like, he was very loose about it. Right? Yeah, he's like, well, there's no golf in heaven, just so you're all aware, because why would there be golf? Unless you love golf, then maybe there's golf. He was very open-ended about it. And his vision, and not saying that was his vision, but growing up, I had a vision of heaven, of puffy clouds, harps, peacefulness, calmness.
Angel babies.
Yeah, angel babies maybe, which is creepy. And then, like a lot of chanting and like Alleluia music, right? For eternity. I'm like, well, okay. Again, definitely don't want to go to hell. But I was like, that's, and then, I'm reading the Bible, and my sister died when she was 24, and I read just about every near-death experience book I could find. Mm-hmm. That was my way of, I had to figure out if my sister was actually dead or actually in heaven, and what was she doing today, right? Was what I kind of wanted to find out. And I'm like, so I just became obsessed with near-death experience books and read everything I could get my hands on. My opinion is, and I'm not saying that is Father's absolute opinion, but I called Father, and he said, you know what, Zach's got an opinion of heaven, and I guess we all do. And I'm like, so I also want to explore what your opinion of heaven is, what my opinion of heaven is, and does the Catholic Church or churches in general actually teach a vision of heaven? Right? I mean, Jesus alluded to it. And one of the things that I loved about when I read that about heaven, I'm like, oh, that's cool. Jesus said, and you will know the quote, I will not, was, we will eat and have wine together in heaven. Right? What was that term he said? I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah.
But I was like, okay, there's food.
I
mean, Jesus wouldn't make this up. Unless, again, it could have been metaphorically speaking.
Right.
But I'm like, oh, cool, there's food and wine in heaven. There's a purpose in heaven.
Right. I'm
like, that was cool to me. So let's just get to it. What is your vision of heaven for all the viewers out there? And, the two questions that I have. Is there a Catholic opinion what heaven is? Something that you teach.
Mm-hmm.
What do you believe it is?
Okay. So
deep, dark questions.
There's a lot of questions.
Oh my gosh, that's an unraveling.
We could talk for eternity, literally.
You probably have you taken classes on that, things like that, how to teach it?
I'll take a class on what's called eschatology, the end times, the study of the end things later. But I've at least had enough of an introduction. Actually, I've been teaching a class this summer to adults in the parish. And next week, we're talking about the 4 last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. The traditional 4 last things.
Only one thing seems positive on that.
Well, maybe, but...
Death, judgment and hell do not seem awesome.
They don't seem awesome, but they're not final either.
Right. I'm
so
just saying.
There's a level of.
There's only one.
There's only one that we
one
want.
good lever.
One that we want to be in, right?
Yeah,
forever.
right.
Like, who would want to be dead forever?
Who wants to be judged?
Or judged forever?
Or for a second.
But those realities, I bring them up because I think they're actually really important to understanding heaven. So, yes, there's the church's view of heaven. I think in general, the Christian view of heaven. I'll try to give that perspective. But just before we get into that, just starting like from my perspective or how I view it.
This gives me like anxiety, like my heart's thumping. Does it you, Marcus, at all?
That's why I'm just staying quiet.
Does it make you a little queasy almost?
Yeah.
It's
awesome.
Odd reaction.
Heaven's awesome.
It should be an easy conversation. For some reason, it's putting me a little bit on edge.
A little on edge. That's okay.
That's like the devil's work.
Well,
like you're never going to go there, so why are we talking about?
No, there's more to life than the earthly life, and so we do need to think about heaven and talk about heaven. And
I think that's one of the
thing.
worst things of our current culture, of our society, is that we ignore death. The pandemic was a classic sign of that.
Yeah.
We chase the end days like it doesn't exist, and we will do anything to stop it. Anything to stop it, including shutting down Mass, which has been one of my biggest problems with what the Catholic and the Christianity did during the pandemic, was shutting down Mass, shutting down the sacraments. Right. My personal problem was like, they had a really cool thing. They could have been like, you know what, pandemic's real. It is very scary. This could cause deaths, but we will not shut down the sacraments. Right. Drag us out of here. Right. They didn't. We'll move on. That's not why you're here. Right. But yeah, I do think, going back to your point, talking about death, thinking about death, it should be really top of mind for us all the time because that recenters us. It's not a bad thing.
And this summer I've been blessed to spend some time at St. Agnes Hospital in Fond du Lac as part of my ministry training, and so I've seen a lot of death, and I've also seen how people deal with death. And so like what you're saying is, it's something that we need to talk about. That's true, because when we don't talk about it, we have this false notion that we're just going to prolong our life forever, even through a lot of suffering and unnecessary experiences, right? Because we almost forget that there's something more beyond, right? And that's something that the Christian hope is rooted in, is heaven. It's not like earthly hope, like I hope the light switch is gonna bring light to the room. It's like I hope in God, who's going to redeem me and save me and give me the joy of heaven. So to get all into that, we can't see heaven, we can't explain it, we can't really talk about it without talking about death, without talking about judgment, without talking about human freedom and the reality of who we are as people. So obviously it brings up a lot of topics that we don't have time to get into a ton, but just to touch on them a little bit, well, I'll try to do that and jump in and correct me or ask questions or whatever.
I'm extremely good at interrupting, which is
that's good.
Horrible.
That's what makes podcasts interesting. Father Sharon and I joke about this all the time when I give classes or teaching something in the church. He always says, "Well, maybe we should both do it because it's more interesting to listen to two people talk than one," which he has some wisdom on that. But just to start off, like your whole question about heaven and what you mentioned earlier, like the vision of heaven. We all have some sort of vision of heaven, and I don't think that's a bad thing. And that does change as our life changes, as our experiences change, as we lose people that are important to us, as we experience happiness in life. All of a sudden, our whole perspective on what that is looks different, right? Because when you're a kid, you just think like going to Disney World is like it's like heaven, and it's like, and then you go to Disney World and you realize, yeah, that was fun, but what's next, Or like in the technology world, you have your iPhone and it's really exciting in the beginning, and then, well, there's a better one out, and you want that because there's something like good about that, something new about that. There's an eternal sort of longing for what's better, what's to come. And I think
I call it the chase for happiness.
The chase
when you're not joyous, like joy and happiness is so confused. When you're just chasing happiness, is all you're really doing is chasing God or love, and us humans confuse happiness, our dopamine kicks, for what we're really searching for, right? Well, I mean, you guys have taught me that. By you guys, I mean the Catholic Church, right? Like, you're always yearning for God, so you always have a hole until you're with God. That will always be there. So we just chase happiness,
right? And
that again, we take that too far. Now we're chasing drugs or alcohol or lust or your
phone
or whatever all of it, right? Whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
And St. Augustine says, he's one of the early Christian saints that I just find really fascinating. he talks about how like sin even is like a lower good or a lesser good that we're trying to love other than God. So there's like a hierarchy to good. So we can think about good in things that we like. For example,
like
sports.
Dante's Inferno, like the
Like
seven
Dante's
layers of hell,
Inferno,
the
right?
opposite
But
of that,
also,
right?
like, we don't always think about like Dante's Purgatorio and Dante's
Yeah,
Paradiso.
the
we like
opposite
to
way.
talk about all the punishments.
Yeah.
We don't always think about like the good because
That
we
wasn't
don't
as much fun to read.
care about that.
It wasn't as
honestly.
much fun. It was like
No, it's not as creative.
Yeah, right. Not as creative. There you go.
But like with
Dante was good
sports,
about talking about hell. He was great at it.
He was great,
right.
yeah. With sports, for example, like we taste something good in that, you know? Now, you're more athletic and more into sports than I am, but I also can enjoy that and see the good in that. Like, I love going to Brewers games and Packer games, and you get excited about watching a championship, you know? You want to win. There's something good about a team working together and overcoming obstacles, and you know, human achievement in that really makes you feel good. There's a rush in that, you know? There's experience of happiness in that. So there is a good there, and we don't want to say that it's not good and like throw it away and pretend like there's just nothing to see. But that good is actually a piece of the good that we're going to experience in heaven. So like when we say, for example, there's no sports in heaven, or no offense, your dog or your cat are not in heaven, like it's not because those things don't bring you happiness on earth, but the fact that they bring you goodness or help you taste a little bit of happiness or a little bit of goodness help show you that there's way more to have in heaven, that there's something even better, infinite, perfect in that goodness in heaven. Does that make sense?
Maybe.
Maybe.
You're getting onto something, maybe.
Onto something. So it's not to say that the sports themselves are not good, and maybe like Father and I joke, and I say this a lot, and he tried to use this line and then jokingly made fun of me in the homily at the 9 a.m. Mass, how if you need golf to be happy in heaven, then you'll have it. But the truth is, you don't actually need golf to be happy, because you'll have God, who is the source of all happiness and the perfection of all happiness. Now, that's hard for us to think about, and like you said, it kind of sounds boring, and we can talk about why that is. But the image of the stadium here, they can see that on the screen.
Yeah, so if you're on Spotify, we're looking at a football player walking out of the tunnel into the football field.
And I think of that image because one way that I like to think of heaven is like life is like a marathon, like an Olympic marathon, and you're running and you're overcoming obstacles, and so there's an element of like human achievement and sport in that. You're also doing it with other people, you know, and you need nutrition and hydration along the way, like the sacraments, grace, help from other friends. You also need like preparation, but then you run the marathon, right? And as you near the end of the marathon, you come into the stadium. You don't come in like on an airlift, you know, or you don't just like drop in. You come in like through a door, and then that door goes into a tunnel, and then the tunnel leads you out slowly from darkness into the enormous eruption of light and of joy and of noise, you know. If you've ever been in the center of a stadium, you just know how loud it is, you know, like when people are cheering, when they're yelling and joyfully proclaiming you know, achievement. Like, think about that. As a runner, you're running in, and I don't consider myself a runner. I do run, but like it's my form of exercise. It's an effective way to, you know, stay in shape. But like, imagine that as a runner, you're running into the stadium. All these people are around you, and those people are like the saints and the angels. And at the end of the tunnel, all the way at the very end of the stadium, is God, sitting on the throne, surrounded by the cherubim and the seraphim, all the angel choirs, praising God, Christ, who sits upon the throne. And we go in to honor and worship and adore, and all of our lives are filled with goodness and joy. But at the same time, we hear the resounding joy of all the people sitting in the stadium that are already there, you know, like our family members, like the saints, like those that we're going to share in that perfection of heaven. So I don't know if that image kind of helps, but it's definitely an image that I've thought about lately, and I've talked to a lot of the school kids about it at Holy Trinity and in the Faith Formation program, because I think it does capture well the whole experience of the struggle, the darkness, the mystery, and then the revelation of light and joy that you get to experience.
Right. So I'll just go non-Christian, right? So all my near-death experience knowledge from the books I read.
Right.
Right. What was interesting about going through that experience was, or the culture, like, okay, so people just plant that, like, there's a lot of negativity around that, or skepticism, which there should be, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, so yeah, when you die, there's a rush of energy or something in your brain with chemicals forms, and that's the rush of light you see.
Yeah.
You know, you removing your soul, removing yourself from the body, and you're aware of what's going on down below, but you're kind of in a, and it's a big whoosh sound, and you're lifted off as all just chemical and science. But the crazy part about that, and it's a learned thing, right? Like, you were told that was going to happen, so you're waiting for it to happen, and so it's, you know, it's a cultural, societal thing. The thing is, it's been happening for thousands of years across hundreds of cultures.
Right.
So people that weren't aware of that, right? And it's almost always very similar, like very universal, that the whoosh of sound, coming back, not wanting to be back. People are very depressed sometimes after a near-death experience.
Right.
They do not long for this world anymore. They long for that world.
Right.
Right. People have had astounding.
That's pretty common. I mean,
very common.
Yeah.
And astounding life journeys, changes, right? They do a 180 of their life when that happens. They wouldn't do that if it was like a science chemical thing, right? So a lot of commonalities. You know, they say a lot. I can never use the words. I have no way to describe what I witnessed, I guess would be the right way to say it. What my soul witnessed, I have no way to describe that.
Right.
You know, the colors are brighter, the knowledge is greater, the words are better, and then it's like, okay, there's no time, and it's like very hard to imagine that. But when you are like quote unquote sports or life, when you are quote unquote in the zone, do you know if that's a minute or an hour? Right, so that would be the eternal zone, right? Like, you just don't know. Time does go away. There is no time, which is crazy. I think we're going to go way longer. He gave me a 15-minute heads up. I'm like, no, we're just tapping this thing. So if you want to listen in or stop, but I might go a little bit here. So time goes away. They said, you know, seemingly it could be in multiple places at once.
yeah.
Right? And then, which would reflect to then why a saint could be in multiple places at once. Right? St. Padre Pio experienced that while he was on the earth.
Right.
So that kind of led to that. People have talked about beautiful fields of flowers. People have talked about, I was greeted by my family and friends, which is awesome to me. You know, the pearly gates, which is kind of more the entrance. You know, the non-Christians would say it just was this om, right? You've heard the word om? It's a yoga term, actually, but they said it's actually this om, like that's God, right? They've met Jesus, right? Like, it's wildly interesting to me, but very, very, you know, Jesus has said, I prepared a house for you. My personal belief I look at it like, if you're going through this whole earthly thing, and then you get to heaven, and it's dynamically, I think God gave us taste of heaven here.
Yeah.
I love St. Therese Lisieux, and Mother Teresa. Look at the very small things. I go back to this a beautiful little flower in northern Wisconsin in a field that no one's ever going to walk this fall, right? And how detailed that is and perfect it is.
Yeah.
I think that's a detail of heaven.
Right.
But that flower is just the minuscule representative of what it actually is. And I actually say, you know, if you think about it, Earth it's comical how small Earth is compared to the, you know, that's something NASA just found that I have up on the board. That's called the universe cartwheel they just found, 500 million light years away.
It's beautiful.
So it's a very old picture, 500 million light years. Very beautiful. And then I'm like, okay, like, well, then when I was little, or even in my 30s, I'm like, well, how many people can heaven hold, right? Like, we have 7 billion people, billions have died in the past. But then if you think, you know, heaven, and he said, oh, it's heaven above and all that, right? Heaven may be these universes, right? If time doesn't exist and space doesn't exist, and maybe Einstein was right and all that stuff, right? Like, that kind of makes sense. Maybe these universes are places to explore forever, right? Like, because in Earth, if we love these things, and again, it's greater goods, but I think if you're like, it's interesting how your soul is made for certain things. Mm-hmm. You're not a sports guy. Marcus totally is. I have a hard time believing that somebody dedicated their life in sports and gets up to heaven and there's no sports. I think it's just a different purpose. You have different logic and reasoning, and you understand the true happiness of the sport
Right.
versus the ego-driven side of the sport
Right.
versus interesting, how does wins and losses work? What if everybody's good at it? Like, that doesn't make any sense
Yeah,
to me.
there's imperfections in it.
Right,
might
which
show
and God
that's
says,
what I'm getting at.
yeah, and
Like,
God
there's-
says it's a perfect heaven, right? But again, the imperfections may be, hey, but you understand your imperfections as being perfect.
well,
right, you're
I guess
perfectly
we'll see.
imperfect,
I
right?
guess we'll see, right? There's a level of mystery there.
No, there totally is, and I want to think, hey, you get up there and they're like, dude, you've been to enough funerals, right? Like, he must have had a job to do up there. I kind of believe that.
Right.
God said, I prepared a house for you. I think there's a house for you. And I do think it, and again, this isn't like some sort of royalty hierarchy, but, the things that you do down here matters. I mean, the Bible couldn't be more clear about that, right?
Yeah.
And I think it matters because I think it's kind of the rewards you get, right? And then again, not the rewards of like, hey, you have better dishes than Zach, or
Right.
your bathroom's bigger.
Right.
But I think you have other opportunities, and again, the first shall be last, and the worst shall be first, the last shall be first. I think there's going to be something to that. I think there's going to be some purposes there of not levels of heaven, but hey, this person has done an amazing job, and they have different responsibilities and different reasons that I think we all think there's a reason we're here.
Yeah.
I think we learn of those reasons in heaven, and it becomes like, oh, I get it.
I get it. Yeah.
I get it. And I don't believe in reincarnation. I know the Christian doesn't either.
No.
But it does lead to reincarnation conversations where it's like, your soul's your soul for eternity.
Right.
Right? So at some point, is it like, hey, I got another challenge for you. You want to take it? I've always thought of that, right? Like, we don't know that for sure. God never said that, like, hey, you'll be back on earth and back and forth. Nobody said it didn't happen, but I'm not saying I believe that, but there's some logical sense, and again, logic should go out the window when you talk of great things like heaven, right? We cannot even fathom what we await, which is like the hardest part, probably being an earthling, because we try to fathom it.
We want to conceive of the idea.
Yeah, I want to conceive of the idea, right?
We're finite. We're creatures.
Oh, yeah,
so
we're
it's
just
hard to understand the infinite.
I'll get to a story behind that, which I love. That's a good one. But yeah, is there like a reason? Like, hey, I got something for you.
Yeah.
Like your next life, you're gonna be a quadriplegic. You're gonna be a seminarian, or I'm gonna call you to that. We want to see how your soul works through those issues. I'm not saying it's a real thing, but it's an interesting subject.
Yeah.
Can
I say one
yeah,
thing about
please.
the capacities thing you're talking about? Like,
Oh yeah, I'm way over that, but it's fine.
well, but that's
yeah.
that's a wonderful thing to
Yeah,
think
yeah.
about when you talk about heaven, and that definitely corresponds to the Christian view of heaven.
Yeah.
Particularly like the Catholic view with the saints and capacities. We would say that there's degrees to heaven. So like so think about it like like you have a shot glass, and then maybe like a 12-ounce glass, and then like a liter.
Right.
All three of those can be filled to the brim.
Right.
But there's different capacities of liquid that can be filled within them, right? And let's say you're putting beer in them or something. You're only getting a taste. You might get the fullness of the taste from the shot glass, but a beer is going to be much more enjoyable humanly, right? In the same way, when we live our life with more charity, with more love, when we know and love God more and know and love other people more in our lives, throughout our lives, we actually increase our capacity for God in heaven, right? So we would say that there are saints that get a fuller view, a fuller experience, it's hard to explain because, everyone gets the fullness of what they're able to get. But if you loved more in life, you will love more in heaven. You will get more in heaven. And that's a beautiful thing. That's a reason
What you give is what you get, right?
Right. That's a reason why we want to live our life for God and for the good, for love here. Because it really does actually make a difference. And then, the reverse of that, if we choose not to love, or we choose to be selfish, we choose to sin, we believe that doesn't just like limit your ability to it doesn't just like limit your capacity in heaven. It means it actually like cuts you off from heaven. Like you actually don't get heaven because you chose yourself over the good of others, right? And that's a complicated thing, but it's a reality, a scary, but responsible understanding of human freedom,
But through the grace of God.
Through the grace of
Don't
God,
be afraid,
right?
because do not be afraid. Through the grace of God, we overcome that.
But it's an offer. God is so he's so respectful of our freedom.
Yeah.
He's like a man who gets on his knee and proposes to a woman that he loves, right? he hopes to God that she's going to say, please say yes, like, I want to marry you with my life, but it's an offer.
No, it's a mother and father
It's an
situation,
offer.
which was the father, right? Like, it's a father situation. Like, hey, I hope you're going to do all this stuff I told you today.
Right. And you never know. But there are capacities, so I think what you were
But
saying
he
there
does
is
know you're going
really
to fail.
good. He knows you're going to fail, and he offers you all the means to be able to come back,
Right.
should you want it. But you still remain free. You still have to move your own will. You have to
Right.
choose to do
Right.
that.
Right.
It's
And
very
sacrifice.
important. Sacrifice. Choose to love, choose to repent when you've done something wrong. How hard is that? It's so hard for us to say when we've done something wrong, I'm sorry, I've done something wrong. But it's actually really good, and the more we do that, the better we get at it. And then we realize we have a much humbler view of ourselves. We're like, oh yeah, well, once in a while I make mistakes.
We suck.
I
For
do.
me, all the time.
I do things all the time.
You do once in a while. I do
No, all the time. The more we recognize that, the more we grow to understand that, we can laugh at ourselves, and we need other people. We need God to help us.
Yeah. And it's not about us
No.
because we're not great.
No.
But that's
Actually, we are good, but that's a different.
It's one of the reasons. It's one of the reasons why I think there are, and back to almost my sports thing, right? I believe there are pets and animals there because God brought pets and animals here, and again, people's lives are somewhat predicated. Some people's lives are predicated on
pets
animals.
and animals thing.
Right now, I believe that my belief of that is like there's angels in heaven,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I do also understand a deer does not have a soul, thus he probably isn't in heaven, right? But a flower may be in heaven, and flower doesn't have a soul. So wouldn't that same sort of equation take place?
Sure.
Perhaps, right?
People think this way all the time, and I think
it's
based in a lot of things, right?
We don't know.
Even in the book of Revelation, for example, which is an apocryphal work. It's not a literal. We don't read it literally. I mean, there's different visions of heaven, right, that are
That's
pretty scary,
Yeah.
But in Revelation, it talks about, especially chapter 21, the very end of the scriptures, it talks about this new heaven and new earth with plants that have fruit and animals running around and all that kind of thing. So that's a scriptural way of understanding goodness, beauty, God who is overflowing with love for us and everything that makes us happy, right? But what we would base the whole thing about like pets being in heaven, animals, you mentioned the soul, is based on an understanding of nature. Like angels have a different nature to humans, which have a different nature to animals. And angels are pure spirits, so they have a pure intellect and a pure will. They perfectly choose at the moment of their creation whether to love God or not. The ones that don't love God become like Satan. They're demons, And the ones that do are like our guardian angels, like St. Michael the Archangel, like the angel Gabriel who announces to Mary the birth of her son. And then you have humans who have an intellect and a will and are made in the image and likeness of God, have freedom, have the capacity to go to heaven, are made in God's image. That's a high dignity, you know. Then you have animals who are good and are loving, but they don't have a rational soul. They can't intuit. They can't intellectually think about things. They can respond. Like if you hurt an animal, it responds to
and it's
that,
gonna look like it has a soul because it's crying
and they can learn behaviors like bark. Okay, it barks, you can. But
I've shot animals
thinking.
like you're like, wow, that, and it's suffering, it's pain, and
right,
they can
and you feel bad about that,
and you should, and they feel all that, but remember they aren't looking at you like what's next or whatever, right? They're trying to get their next meal. It's very physical. It would be like I will say it this way, in my opinion, if our body didn't have a soul,
right?
Think of call it the monkey brain. When your body's just working in monkey brain, that's what an animal does all the time, right? Joe Rogan, monkey brain.
Yeah, so that's just, that's the whole thing with animals. So like our pets, we love our pets. They're important to us. They bring us happiness in life in a minor way, but in a real way. And so that's another line. If you need your pet in heaven to be happy, then you'll have your pet. But you really don't, because the pet helps you realize that there's goodness and happiness. But in heaven, we have perfect happiness, perfect goodness, right?
Which is impossible to think about. That's the thing.
It's so hard for us to think about. And frankly, like you said earlier, it's boring because we don't like to think about God. We don't. Part of our fallen nature is that we're not actually that interested in God. We're not actually that interested in heaven. But we have to kind of work to respond to God's grace, to think about that and to get excited about that, because that's what it is like.
So if it's not like a sin or anything if like I think heaven has dogs.
No, it's not a sin.
Right. Okay.
No. It would just be like we would want to be in our life purified of the thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't need my dog to be happy in heaven.
Right. It's like, this is the problem, is that we love Earth. Like most of us that are alive love being alive.
You don't know anything else, right?
We love Earth, but when you're 5 years old, you love like your backyard and like your sandbox,
Right.
And then you get older and you realize there's a lot more to love in the world. In heaven, it's infinitely better, right? So we can't just think of heaven like Earth without suffering.
Right.
And everything that we like in Earth, like alcohol and family and friends and sports and music.
Right.
Oh, it's just that without suffering. No, it's way more than that. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's back to these galaxies, right? Like if you imagine this galaxy, I mean, imagine what might be in that galaxy.
Right.
If God planned it that way, right? If that was heaven, which I'm not saying it is, I'm not saying it's physical, but things like that, right? If you think of that, which is created for us 500 million light years away, what might await?
Right.
I do wonder that at times, though, like, right, there's no reason us three should be in this room right now, right? The math, logic, the odds of us three coming from our parents, being created at this time and place in this spot, like souls cross I do think souls do cross here for a reason, which means souls then I think you're connected almost for eternity, right? Because we're here for a reason.
Yeah.
We're made for each other, and if we're made for each other, we're maybe made for eternity, right? So I think there's a reason you bump into people and marry people and have neighbors and good friends and
Providence.
Providence
from our world.
Yeah, so I do have a story that that really helped me when my sister passed away. There was and it's an analogy. There's two twins in a mother's womb. Have you heard this one?
No.
I love this one. So. Yeah, there's two twins in a mother's womb, and they're like, this is perfect. We have everything. Right? They're 9 months. They've been in there 9 months. Perfect. We have food. We have each other. We have water, we have needs, we're comfortable, we're warm. Like this, I would never ever want to leave this place. I know you, I'm in a perfect state. And then they're born. Yeah. And they said that'll be the exact difference, right? From that womb to earth is the next gap of you going, I have everything I need. And then it's like comical, right? And then you get to heaven, you're like, oh. But they said from the near-death experiences, like you like instantly get it. You instantly feel that love. You instantly see things. And again, so much so that you do not want to go back.
Right.
But there's words and you still see things. Like you're not just this blob, which, again, I think some people think of heaven and then say, well, and not only because you don't want to think about it, because
like,
your vision.
Why would I live for that?
Yeah.
Like,
why would I waste all this cool stuff
boring.
on earth to be like a blob and
you
love
only live
God?
once and then you're going to die. Like, why do I care about heaven? Right?
Yeah, so much. Where to me, I think I've had deeper faith when I'm like, I'm going to have a purpose there. I'm going to have reasons. I'm going to have a house. I'm going to have a village.
Yeah.
And again, I'm going to have earthly things, right? And you would say, I think where you're going is like, Joel, you won't need earthly things, but if you want to care about that, great. But I'm like,
and
I think
perfection
it'll be
when we realize we don't. Like,
Yeah,
the less we
right.
realize we need those things to
Right.
be happy. Like, think of an elderly person who has amassed all kinds of
Right.
things in their life, and then they realize as they get close to death that they don't get to bring those things with them.
Right.
But they can choose to be happy about that and to be grateful for the experience
Right.
that they've had that for, and to be excited for what's coming ahead.
Right.
Or they can just be totally lost and
Right.
sad,
Which is you see sometimes.
which you see sometimes, and that's hard.
Yeah, because you can't give them that in their last minutes.
Yeah.
No, and I still go back to, hey, we will drink and have wine in heaven, and there's a purpose for you, and a home has been built.
I hope we'll drink wine in heaven.
Yeah, no, I do. But I really.
But I
think,
mean, I don't think we really need it. But it would be nice if we had it.
No,
huh?
I think that's.
It's a good analogy, at least.
But even beyond that, I think that gap is the same gap. The gap that you have, that I have, maybe we are on the same page. I think all that stuff exists, but we understand we do that for the goodness of God, and we aren't chasing it. We aren't needing it. We're simply truly enjoying the love behind it.
Yeah.
The truly that God gave us this wine, and we truly finally understand, like, this is good, or like a sport, right? We're golfing, and we literally, and again, we'd have to not be
Just
perfect
the
at
best
it.
game ever.
Right, but not in a
Constantly.
way, but not in a way that we're improving,
Yeah.
or maybe we are improving, but at infinite, or there's other sports or something, right? But there's an infinite. We have not infinite knowledge. I want to give us knowledge in heaven, but we have an infinite love and happiness and appreciation that we're doing it.
Right.
Right there, and there's glimmers of that here, and there's glimmers of heaven here, right? If you think of your soul when you're in the zone on the golf course, you're like, oh, that felt really good.
On the
Even
basketball court, you're just
yeah,
in
but
the
again,
moment.
it's in the moment. It's intentional. We talked about it yesterday in the pod. Intentional, present, right? Present is almost a vision of heaven, right? Because you're truly, finally present. Because there is no time and space. You're not worried about the past or the present. You aren't worried what other people think because you are at the feet of God in love.
Yeah.
So I think what you're saying, Father Strand's saying, what I'm saying, I think it's all the same.
Yeah.
I think it's going to all be the same.
There's levels of perfection to it that we want to think about. Can we talk just for
But
a second
I could be totally wrong.
about the middle ground? Can we talk for a second about
Purgatory?
Purgatory?
Yeah, sure.
Just touch on
Marcus,
that.
where are you at on Purgatory? You know about Purgatory? Are you religious at all?
Catholic, but I'm not great. I'll tell you that. I haven't been to church in a while.
Okay.
So.
Oh boy, we'll talk after. Zach will look you up. So where are you at? Where are you at on heaven? Like this whole
Yeah,
conversation.
I think it's the same thing. I think it's like the clouds. It's Happyville. It's the end. I always felt it. In terms of like you would see people
Happyville.
You
Boring
would
as
see
hell.
people of like the past that you lost, maybe that you've never
Yeah.
connected with,
Yeah.
like kind of that like this is the end, but it's also the beginning of something new. So
Yeah.
kind of similar in terms of like the clouds and just
I have lost my grandparents and my Uncle Hoobie, right? And again, it's still your soul. So I think you get to heaven, but it's still your soul. I love playing sheepshead with them.
Yeah.
I still think we're gonna sit down and play sheepshead. Like that was
Maybe
again.
when
It
we
was
have our bodies.
What?
Maybe when we're resurrected with our bodies.
No, I think our souls can still do things. Again, I think still you have a purpose. I don't think you're floating around like a blob. I think it's like, hey, we had a really good time on earth playing sheepshead, but now we're in heaven. And now it's like we have a different perspective of it. We have a different appreciation for God. We're not in a hurry. We're present. We're aware. We loved it there. We love it here, right? I think some things transfer. You're a little bit different than me on that. I think some of that stuff transfers, and that geeks me out a little bit. Because I'm like, I want to go to heaven. And I do want to hug my sister, right? And I do want to play cards with my Uncle Hoobie, and I do want to hunt.
Right.
I want to fish with my grandpa. But I think the fishing's different, right? The ponds are more beautiful, like infinitely more beautiful. The fish are infinitely unique. And again, if right, like, and again, that doesn't mean fish has a soul and it talks to you or something. The fish earned its way to heaven.
But it's got this goodness to it, right?
Everything's got this goodness, presence, and love around it forever, constantly.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
And
Go
that
ahead,
helps
sorry.
us. That helps us to think about. I mean, these sort of analogies, I don't think they're completely unhelpful because they do at least allow us to ponder it, to discuss it, to pray about it, to think about it.
Or motivate us.
We might be, and motivate us. We just have to remember that we might be totally inadequate in our thought of that when we actually get there. But in the meantime, it's fine to.
I believe we are I think we are.
move
Again,
in
you
that
could.
direction.
Again, the two twins in the womb could never fathom Earth.
Yeah.
So I'm fully aware I'm inadequate. Like I'm not going to get to heaven
Right.
being like, oh yeah, this is a total
Exactly
totes,
what I thought it was going to be
totes,
like.
everybody. I figured
was
this
right.
out like when I was like 40.
I'm here.
I was
I
right.
am here.
I'm crushing it.
Yeah, I'm crushing it, man. I was on this podcast, like what? And also why I think like Infinity, I always say like this, like we miss my sister so much. We've talked about it as a
Right.
family, but I'm like doesn't that kill them? Quote unquote kill. Doesn't that really? Again, if God's love and God's perfect, aren't they like? And if they can kind of help us from below, which means they know kind of what's going on down here, and again in some infinite way, right? We all have heard that or know that.
Right.
My brain's like how, why?
Yeah.
But again, remember for them, how we miss somebody, but we see them and we're like it was 2 seconds. That's what it'll be like for them.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you're
Because they're
here.
outside of space and time, so that's where we have
Yeah,
to
that's what I mean. Like 80 years
about
to
it.
them is like, oh, you're here.
Right.
Your path was crazy. It was awesome. I love what you did down there. Perfect peace. Let's go fishing, right? In my world. But go purgatory.
So purgatory.
Sorry.
So why does the church have purgatory? We'll do it really quickly.
And it's not in the Bible. So a lot of people question it.
There is evidence in the Bible. So in the second Maccabees, that's before Christ, there's evidence of Judas Maccabees praying for the dead who were imperfect in their
Right.
love.
But Jesus
for
doesn't
God.
reference purgatory.
Jesus does talk about the fire of purgatory, and then it's
You
referenced.
should have me on more often. I'm like the
Paul.
guy that thinks he knows but doesn't know.
Well,
Like,
that's
I'm pretty
okay.
good, right? Marcus like
1 Corinthians,
no, not
1
exactly.
Corinthians chapter 3, verse 15, St. Paul talks about the fire of
We should call it like the
purifying
dumb Catholic,
love.
like the dumb
No,
Catholic with
no.
Joe. No, it's good because I think
There's
There's
it's
so
because it's
much
like,
more, though.
but I
This
do
is-
think I'm like the stereotypical Catholic, right? Like I think I know what I know, but I don't.
Well,
Anyway,
there's just more. There's
Yeah, right.
always more.
So
for us
anyways,
to
yeah,
learn.
Corinthians,
So
go
1
ahead.
Corinthians chapter 3, verse 15 through 16 talks about this fire of love, this perfecting, purifying fire of love. And then in 1 Peter, I think it's chapter 7, don't quote me on that, you can read the whole letter, it's pretty short and find it for yourself. He also talks about this purifying love of God. St. Catherine of Genoa, who was a 15th century saint, has this vision of purgatory, and she says that all of the souls in purgatory are happier in purgatory than the happiest soul on earth, even though those souls are suffering because they're not yet perfect for heaven. So what the church teaches about purgatory is that the reason we have it is because only those in, like, you have to be a saint to go to heaven. You have to be perfect, like without any sort of defect to be able to go to heaven. And that's not just like the canonized saints like St. Augustine, St. Michael, St. Thomas. No, it's just saints in general. You have to be the perfect version of yourself.
Definition of saint.
To go there, right. But purgatory exists as like the antechamber to heaven. So if you're going to purgatory, you're going to heaven. You don't go to hell after purgatory. Your soul is infinitely focused on heaven now. But there are things in our life when we die, especially when we die unexpectedly, or in general, I think everybody dies with this sort of attachment. They're imperfect in their attachments, right? They like too much the things of earth. They like too much certain relationships. They're not as much focused on God or loving God as they ought to be, right? Which is what is required, what is necessary for heaven. So purgatory exists to purify us of our attachments to things that are not of God, frankly, and to help us to realize the absolute gravity of our sin, which was so damaging for us, but that God in his infinite love and mercy has forgiven us through our requesting it, right? He's given us that gift, and now we're able to enjoy it. The thing about purgatory, which is really cool and why it's important for us to remember, is like in the Catholic Church, every Mass that we have is offered for souls who have died, because we desire, every Mass prays for the dead. We constantly pray for those who have died so that they might be free of their attachments to sin and might enjoy eternal paradise, right? And then we also believe that the saints in heaven, those who have gone through purgatory and that are already enjoying beatitude with God, are able to pray for us, right? Are able to offer their merits for our salvation, both those of us on earth and those in purgatory. So you can think of like purgatory like the middle ground on earth and in heaven. Both those on earth and those in heaven are meant to help those in purgatory to get to heaven. It's kind of like being on a bonfire, right? And your soul's kind of like floating in the flames. Like, we need to add wood to the fire. That's what the church calls like indulgences, right? To add wood to the fire so the fire gets taller, so that your soul rises and can get lighter and go to heaven. So that's just a brief
But remember, I mean, I always think when I've talked to people about purgatory, in purgatory there's no sense of time either, right? Like,
right.
Because it's just your soul. So again,
until the general judgment, right?
Right. So again, it's just
right.
And by general judgment,
we talk about judgment in two ways, right?
So 4 things.
So this is the judgment piece.
Right.
So we talked about death already. We talked about heaven. We briefly touched on hell. Judgment.
I'm good with. We'll do hell.
Is a different day. We don't want hell, right? So we want to think about heaven.
It's Friday. We can't.
So one podcast at a time.
Judgment, though, is we think of 2 judgments. So there's an immediate judgment when your soul dies. So the moment your soul leaves your body forever, you are judged, right? And that's not a judgment of like evil, like God's a mean judge who's going to beat the crap out of you. It's not that kind of judgment. It's a judgment like in a court, where you go before the court and it's like your life is on display, and are you living with God? Are you friends with God? Are you living in grace or not?
And I read of people that have visions of the last judgment day or judgment at all, and they said it's over, near-death experience people, like it's so overwhelming.
Right.
And some people have a vision of almost hell, like if you don't get through judgment, like you just can't even handle it.
Right.
Because you don't have the love for God,
right.
That may devoid you of hell, right? Like you just can't even survive because you can't believe the things you caused because of your sin, right? So judgment is not, I could be wrong, what you believe in or what the Catholic Church teaches, but judgment, is really, if you think of a sin, it's got this tentacles, it's got this spider web effect.
Sure.
So I did something bad to Marcus, but then what did Marcus do? And we get judged like that, like in an instant, right? Like it's an unbelievably emotion because you're like, whoa.
Right.
Like, I mean, think of how understanding that would be.
But we also believe, and this is why we have mercy. This is why in the Catholic Church we have confession. We have God who gives us, restores grace to our soul. We believe that if we repent of our sin and ask God for forgiveness, and He communicates that through the sacraments, we're given, a freedom from our sin, right? So judgment is this
still got to go through it.
You still have to go through this moment. But in judgment, the particular judgment, that's why you say particular in general. Particular is for my soul when I die.
Right.
That will determine whether I go to hell or purgatory in heaven, right? So it's one or the other. It's a Y road. You take one road or the other. Hopefully we go the right way. That's why it's important that we live our lives with God and loving God and asking for mercy and understanding when we sin to repent, right? That's very, very, very important. We can't stress that enough.
And I'll get to sin if you're still listening, and thank you for doing that because it's a long one.
We're going along
and it's a lot. It's a
Sorry.
lot. Also, I think that's why the Catholic Church, and I think the Catholic Church, even in the last 20 years, since I've been 48 years, I think you guys talk about hell way more than we used to. Yeah. But I think that's important right now. C.S. Lewis said, if I was the devil, so do I. And he said, if I was the devil, what's the easiest thing to do? What would be the best trick? Yeah, there's actually no hell. You can do whatever you want. God loves you. God forgives you. There's no hell. You're golden, bro. You just live. You do you, right? I mean, that's think of all the things that are happening in our culture right now. You do you. Can do whatever you want. Don't judge others. Just let people be. The saints, the devil's working hard, right? Like, you don't have to go to church. Just go for a walk in the woods on a Sunday. Non-denominational. As long as you're having fun, make yourself happy. God loves you no matter.
Strong about
God
that,
loves
right?
you no matter what.
We think that's crazy.
Yeah, but then you come to a Catholic Church mass, and all of a sudden they're like, "Hell is real," and you're like, "I hate Catholic churches."
I'm sorry.
That's a fair thing, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
we don't like reality, though. Sometimes
no, I'm not
reality.
saying that's. I'm just saying
it's hard, though.
I'm just saying that snarky reality of like.
Yeah. It's true. We have talked about it a lot because, frankly, we need to talk about it.
So you had another judgment.
So there's particular judgment. That's where we end up. Yeah. That's our final direction. But then there's the general judgment, which is a beautiful thing to think about in our tradition.
God, give me something beautiful.
Like
Are you getting sweaty in here, Marcus?
Matthew. It's all beautiful. Heaven's so beautiful. We've been talking about infinite perfection.
Still have
and
anxiety. Okay, we're going in.
Matthew 25. Jesus talks about separating the sheep from the goats, right? Those on the left and those on the right. And those who loved and cared for the poor and visited the sick. And we all know that passage very well. It's not just those actions that he's describing, though. It's those you have showed love to, right? Right. But that's like a preview of the last judgment, or the general judgment, we call it, where the Lord draws all of us together, right, for like a big meeting. And again, we're outside of space and time, so like most of us hate meetings in this life because they're just like long and boring.
Yeah, and we're thinking like we gotta get a ticket.
It's a bad
and
analogy.
we're thinking like we gotta get a ticket to the Coliseum.
I'm using a bad analogy.
Like, when's he coming out? He's like 2 minutes late. Yeah.
But this meeting, right? It's the general judgment. He's going to pull all of us together, and we're going to be able to see how all of our lives, how all of Providence has fit together. So like how all of our good has affected people, right? And how all of our evil has affected people, right? And how God, who is so good,
it's going to be one heck of a PowerPoint,
has drawn good out of everything that we've done evil. Because God is it's not like good and evil are equal. It's like good is over evil, right? And God draws good even out of the most horrible evil that has ever happened.
I love thinking about
that's
good.
Going to be
I think about good and evil of light. I love how the Bible uses light consistently, and Jesus uses light consistently. If you think of good and evil, it takes the smallest candle to light up the entire room of darkness. And I think when you say darkness and light, and again, that's why I think heaven does equate to earth, because you have things like that on earth that are so logical, the steps when we talk to heaven, right? Because good overcoming evil, light versus darkness. When you near-death experience things I read, it's such a rush of light. Light is love, right? Beauty, creation,
vision that
music.
Causes bliss, vision that causes happiness.
Yes, yes, unexplainable happiness, right? Where pets are.
So, anyways, that's the difference between the general judgment and the particular judgment. Yeah. Particular means that we really actually will be judged, our soul, whether we like it or not. Some people, and this is why it's really important that people like actually think about this in their life, because whether you like it or not, whether you believe or don't, like it's going to happen. And so that's a scary thing. That should kind of get our heart moving a little bit. Like that is reality. That is true.
I mean, part of your job that you're being trained for is
to communicate that to people.
Well, I was going to take it even further. You guys get trained a little bit. Again, you're going through training. Right. And I can tell you do, and tell me if you don't. Like, your job is a bit to make Marcus and I a little uncomfortable.
Well, I think the Lord does that, right?
Yeah, but you're a vehicle.
Our job
is
to
you're a vehicle of the Lord, right?
Bring that up. So it's in general, it's a good thing, right? The whole experience. Like we get to see how it all fits together, and in the end, we get to see why the people we lost unexpectedly, how God brought good out of that, and how just all kinds of things mysteriously happen in our life that we don't get yet. But the veil is over our eyes.
Oh,
in heaven, the veil is lifted, and we get to see God for who He is, and get to see how it all works out.
No, I mean, I miss my sister
That's
to
a
death.
beautiful thing.
I mean, I miss my sister to death, literally, right? So she died when she was 24 unexpectedly in a car accident. But I mean, when I've grieved over that and thought about that a lot, is my family is unbelievably better because of her passing, which sounds horrible, but like we're closer.
God drew something good out of it.
Life kicked it up into the gear for all of us in different ways, and that doesn't make it perfect.
It doesn't make it easy or not sad.
No, and it doesn't mean that I wish
suffering.
it would have ever happened. I hope it never comes across that way. But there was obviously a lot of good in that, and I think I talked about Paul Krause before, a builder up in Berlin. He had cancer, and he was only a few weeks away from dying. When I had lunch with him, he said, cancer is not all bad. He's like, there's a lot of good in cancer. He's like, which is kind of like dying, right? I mean, he was like, and he was so wise that way. He's like,
that's beautiful.
I had so many deep conversations. I had so many reflection points. I had so many moments that cancer has given me that I wouldn't have been aware of, which is not a lot of different than death, finding Jesus, finding God. Bad things happen, so good things can happen. God's plan is way bigger than our plan, right? Like, no matter what happens, it's God's plan, not our plan.
And it's so much better than we could ever imagine, which is why we do want to talk about heaven. It's why it's fun to think about it. And it does make us a little uncomfortable because we can't really know for certain. But we do know some things about it, and so we want to rejoice in the good of that, in that gift, and then always long evermore with our lives to experience more of that joy now and forever with God.
Right, and I think the word joy is so important, and I've kind of been obsessed with that last few podcasts even, is joy versus happiness.
Yeah.
I've even put that on my Facebook page a few times. We're so searching for happiness these days. The next concert event, the next ball game, the next pet we're going to get, which is kind of what you're saying is like, that's not heaven, Joel. Right. And I'm more like, but if you find, I am friends with a few seminarians and a few priests. I love when you guys are together, the joy you so let's say let's say I'm walking my dog, Kobe, and I run into you guys having a few beers. Yeah. Right? And I love people in a local bar too, right? So then I talk to you guys for 10 minutes, and you're having a few beers, and you're talking like same thing that I'm going to hear in 10 minutes. And then I go to the local bar. And in that moment, for those people, God doesn't exist for whatever reason, right? Yeah. But it's the exact same conversation. But they're happy. They're hugging, they're screaming, they're yelling, they're cheering.
Right.
The joy you guys, and maybe you don't even realize that, the joy you exude, the energy that you bring to me, to my soul, is so different than the happiness that is happening in downtown Kewaskum. Right, and again, I go to bars. I love bars. They're not Brad.
You lift up us on a pedestal, but I have the same experience when faithful Christians, faithful Catholics, for example, that's who I see most of the time, are living a joyful life in God, right?
So in a micro, again, we can't equate this earth to that earth, but I keep doing it. So in a microscopic way, that what we feel, that energy, that love, we'll see that in perfection in heaven, right? Right. So we're bringing that together. We're seeing some sort of glimpse of it for a microscopic moment, whatever that means. Right. And then it's emulated in heaven, I believe.
Amen.
We have other podcasts coming up. Wow. I want to use math as I want to do a podcast with you someday. We're going to wrap up. Stay tuned for further podcast when you come back, because you're good at this.
Next year.
You're good at this. You're good at this. I want to how you can believe in God by using math. Right? Think of how perfect math is. Yeah. Right? Math is perfect.
Reason.
But math, like true math, is perfect. So how would that exist in a random universe?
Yeah. It's a fascinating thing.
Right? Like there's a random. So if you don't believe in God,
random,
no. But if you don't believe in God,
right,
and you say the universe is random, then explain to me math.
Yeah. Rule, law, anything that has order to it.
Yeah, but especially math, right? Like rule and law, there's gray areas. Humans made it up. It's for our societal reasons. We need to, right?
We'll talk about that
like even monkeys do rules and laws. But math is a perfect function, right? A circle, right? circle, right? Like, how can that be random? Anyways, love to have you on, brother. Thank you very much. Great luck in Rome.
Thank you.
If you continue to listen to all this, get your
God
butt.
bless you.
God bless you and get your butt to church.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.